Hello, welcome to another First Chapter Friday. Today is the last day of Black History Month, and there is one person who represents Black history for me who is just such an amazing role model. He has such positivity. He does so many charitable things, one of them being he is a spokesperson for the Boys and Girls Club, and he wrote a book that was all the proceeds going to the Boys and Girls Club. And that book I'm going to share with you today. A Hand to Guide Me by Denzel Washington, with assistance of Daniel Peisner to collect all these stories. It's so like Denzel Washington, who is a very humble man, to have a book whose cover is him, and one would think it's a memoir or something about him, and have it turn around and become a collection of short stories by people who are inspirational to him. So that we might follow Denzel Washington, National Spokesperson for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Let's start with a verse from Proverbs. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Powerful words, don't you think? It's a simple sentiment too, and yet I'm amazed how many people lose sight of it these days. Anyway, it's a line that's been kind of bouncing around in my head as I put this book together, because I've been reminded on almost every page of the importance of shaping our children and laying a strong foundation from which they may soar. Show me a successful individual, and I'll show you someone who didn't want for positive influences in his or her life. I don't care what you are or what you do for a living. If you do it well, I'm betting that there's someone cheering you on and showing you the way. I'll even lay odds. There's a line from one of my movies, The Bone Collector, that ties to what we're talking about. Destiny is what we make it. In the movie, I play a quadriplegic, a homicide detective named Lincoln Rhyme on the trail of a serial killer. There's a scene with Angela Jolie's character where my guy gets to talking about the hand he's been dealt and the meaning of fate and fortune and destiny. It's one of the real turning point, epiphany type scenes of the movie, because Lincoln Rhyme was planning on his suicide before he met up with Angelina Jolie. Then he got caught up in the case, and soon enough there were sparks between the two lead characters. Suddenly, there was every reason to live, where just moments earlier there had been no reason to at all. We're all destined to leave some kind of mark. I really believe that. We are all meant to walk a certain path at a certain time in a certain direction for a certain purpose. I believe that too. But I also believe we miss our marks from time to time, and without a certain push in the right direction, we might never find the path that we are meant to follow. This book is about the certain push, that helping hand that we've all had to reach for in order to get there, where we're going. Train up a child in the way he should go, and he might get to where he's meant to be heading all along. I've had that push in my life, going back as far as I can remember. So are the folks you're about to meet in these pages. Actors, athletes, musicians, doctors, lawyers, politicians, business leaders. They've all had the guidance of someone or something at some time or another. They've all built on that guidance and internalized it and made it their own. After all, you don't get to the top of your game or the top of your field or the top of the charts entirely on your own. And I want to celebrate the good people who have helped us get where we're going. Every one of us has a story to share. Every one of us looks back on a parent or a coach or a teacher or a role model who set us straight and steered us right. It doesn't matter if you've gone on to become a ball player or a firefighter or the President of the United States. It doesn't matter if you struggle to keep your family together under one roof or if you've just been named Employee of the Month down at the factory. If you've achieved any kind of real and lasting success, you've made any kind of difference, it's more than likely there was someone there to help point the way. For me, the first push outside my own home came from the Boys Club in Mount Vernon, New York. I spent a lot of time there as a kid, first out of necessity, then because there was no place I'd rather be. I was there most days after school and most weekends until I went away to high school. At some point, I started working, and I couldn't get to the club as often as I might have liked, but it remained very much a lifeline, a path to purpose. See, my parents didn't have the time to take me to this or that activity the way parents do today. They couldn't always be home when I was done with school. They were too busy working. My mother worked in beauty salons. My father was a preacher. He had a couple churches, one in Virginia, the other in New York. In addition to that, he'd always had at least 2 full-time jobs, so he was always working, always on the road, always going out of his way to help some other family in need or crisis. And my mother, she had her hands full running back and forth to work and trying to keep the household going. The center of everything. In my neighborhood, the Boys Club was the center of everything. It was my whole world, just about, from the time I was 6 years old. It was where I learned how to play ball, where I learned how to focus and set my mind on a goal, where I learned about consequences, where I learned how to be a man. And at the heart of it all was a powerful force of nature named Billy Thomas. He pretty much ran the place, and let me tell you, he was a local treasure. Billy helped a lot of kids because he took an interest. He cared, and he made each of us feel like we had something to offer, like we were someone special. For my money, though, Billy Thomas was the someone special, and I just thought this guy was it, you know? He had it so completely together that just sitting back and watching him go about his business was an education, and that's what I did. I'd catch myself trying to walk like Billy, trying to shoot a foul shot like Billy, trying to carry myself like Billy, trying to treat other people with the same respect and dignity that he may offer. Even his handwriting was fascinating to me. He was an artist, and you could see it in the way he signed his name. There was a real flourish to it, and to this day, I look at my signature and I think back to how I used to copy Billy Thomas. It's in the way I sign my name. It's in the way I write a letter. It's in most everything that I do. Another great push found me at a barbershop called Modernistic on 3rd Street in Mount Vernon. That's where I worked, starting when I was 11 or 12. The job eventually pulled me from the Boys Club, as making money became more and more important. I still kept my hand in down the club, but I was itching to work. Soon enough, the barbershop became its own kind of lifeline for me, its own path to purpose. The place was run by a man named Jack Coleman, who took me in as a kindness to my mother. At least that's how I always look back on it. She was in the beauty shop business, and she set me up as Mr. Coleman's cleanup guy. I thought it was the best job in the world. I had all kinds of hustles back then. You'd walk in the shop, and I could tell right away how much money you had. I'd check out your shoes, and I'd just know. I'd have people bringing me their dry cleaning, and I'd take it out and deliver it back to their house. I'd run all kinds of errands. They'd step out of Mr. Coleman's chair, and I'd be on them with the whisk broom, brushing off their collar, saying, "Man, how are you doing today?" or "Man, you look good." There was money to be had all day long, especially if you were respectful and solicitous. My thinking was, if you had some loose change dangling around in your pocket on the way in the door, I'd do whatever I could to see that money into my pocket before you left. What an education! What a bunch of characters! It was a real neighborhood joint, and Mr. Coleman wasn't just the head barber. He was like the modernistics' master of ceremonies. I thought he was, too. Another someone special. Another someone to look up to. He had his own business. He called his own shots. He presided over this wonderfully eccentric assortment of souls who paraded in and out of his shop all day long. Chess masters, college professors, neighborhood businessmen. That's probably where I got my first acting lessons, at the barber shop. Sweeping up and listening to all these stories from all these colorful individuals who could spin a tale or two. There was a sign on the wall that said, "Credit is dead. It was killed by the last man who didn't pay." That gives you an idea of the tone and the tenor of the place. Mr. Coleman was another strong individual, like Billy Thomas, and he ran that place like an extension of his own personality. I'll never forget how the shop used to close at 6:30, and someone would invariably walk through the door at 6:35 and say, "Oh, am I late?" And Mr. Coleman would say, "No, you're early. You're the first. You're the first one up tomorrow morning." But of course I wasn't planning to stay at the Modernistic forever. It was just a place to hang my cap for some time, a place to hustle some loose change on afternoons and weekends, and to collect some life lessons from the regulars. Besides, my mother didn't want me to stand 16 hours a day over someone's head like she and Mr. Coleman had to do. She wanted something better for me. She worked too hard, she used to say, to see me walk that same path. She expected me to go to college, and I meant to meet her expectations, although, to be honest, I didn't have the first idea what to do when I got there. Thinking big. The boys' club, that's where I looked for hope and purpose and direction. That's where I learned to dream and to think big. And for that, I've got to give Billy Thomas his props. He had us thinking that anything was possible and that even the sky didn't present any kind of limit. That type of thinking was essential for a kid like me. Hey, it's key for every kid, but especially important for kids who might be too easily tempted to turn down some lesser roads. See, a lot of my friends in and around Mount Vernon weren't just heading for trouble. They'd already run face first into it. There was a long list of kids in town who weren't going to make it out of Mount Vernon alive, and for a time, I was on that list. There were gangs, there was violence, there was drug and alcohol abuse, and all the things that plague our lower-class urban communities, and for that matter, our middle and upper-class suburban communities as well. You can't avoid these negative influences, no matter where you live or how much money you've got in the bank. Sure, I've got into my share of trouble in Mount Vernon, which is why the boys' club was all the more important, and a guy like Billy Thomas was all the more vital. One of Billy's great innovations was to hang college pennants from the walls of the club's main hall, one for each school that his kids went on to attend. There weren't a lot of them, but there were enough. The deal was, when you graduated high school and you went away to college, you had to send Billy one of those banners, and he would put it up proudly on the wall for the rest of us to see. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't make any kind of big deal out of it. He just put them up, and he let them speak for themselves. I used to look at these names, these places, and I'd think, man, anything is possible. Boston University, Syracuse, Vanderbilt, Marquette. Schools I'd never even heard of. Places I've never even heard of. places I didn't even think I'd see. Gus Williams, a great ball player from my neighborhood, was a couple years ahead of me in school. He went out to USC on a basketball scholarship, and I can still remember standing out in the hallway, looking up at his USC pennant and thinking, so those are the school colors. So that's the Trojan, the mascot. I must have looked at that thing for hours. I didn't even know where California was. Couldn't imagine what the sun looked like out there or what the air smelled like. I'd never been anywhere outside of Mount Vernon, but I just stared at that pennant and I thought, okay, this guy I know, this guy I grew up with, he's out in California right now on a scholarship. He made it. And then I thought, if Gus can make it, then maybe I can make it too. Like I said, Billy knew what he was doing with those banners. I sent my banner back to Billy, same as everyone else, but first I went off on a partial scholarship to a prep school called Oakland Academy in upstate New York, across the river from the Poughkeepsie. There were only about 6 of us inner city kids at Oakland, kids who might be labeled troubled youth in today's politically correct climate. Truth was, we weren't troubled so much as we were caught between schools and the streets. Somehow my mother realized that she needed to get me out of Mount Vernon and away from the negative influences that found me outside the boys' club and the barbershop if she wanted me to survive and thrive. So that's what she did. Thank God for that. And mercifully, she even found a way for someone else to help foot the bill because she could not have afforded the tuition on her own. Thank God for that, too. My mother paid what she could the first 2 years I was at Oakland. I didn't understand how much she was scraping in those days to make even a relaxed schedule of payments. I've since come to realize it was a point of pride to her to be able to contribute to my private school education. I came to that realization in a public way because she never really talked about it. I did an interview on 60 Minutes once, and one of Ed Bradley's producers went out and he found the old account ledger from Oakland. And I saw that my mother was paying $16 here, $37 there, $109 there. Whatever she had, whenever she could afford it. Odd numbers. $48, $21. Whatever she was able to save that month. And I looked at those figures recorded in that ledger, and I saw my mother breaking her back to lift me up, one small payment at a time. I had an English teacher at Oakland named Mr. Underwood who would always start the day by having us read the New York Times. That was something new for me. He was also my homeroom teacher, and every morning there'd be a fresh copy of the paper laid out on each of our desks, and we'd spend the first 15 minutes or so reading the Times. In the beginning, I just thumbed through the sports pages to see how my favorite teams were doing, but over time, I started to read some of the other sections as well. It's a habit I try to keep up to this day, staying plugged into the world by reading the newspaper. That opened up a whole world to me back then. That's where I first learned about Steuben glass, because they used to run an ad every day on the same page of the paper. But I also started learning and caring about what was going on in the rest of the world. Vietnam was winding down. Watergate was ramping up. And the civil rights movement was bringing about some positive and substantial change. And I was learning to soak it all in through the morning paper. I played football at Oakland. In my head, they had a big-time program. Well, it was as big-time as a 6-man football program could be, but that was just fine with me because in my head, I was a big-time player. I used to wear number 40 in honor of Gale Sayers. He was my guy. The way he moved, the things he could do on the football field. He was it, too. And the Boys and Girls Club, sports was a great big deal. It was everything, and Gale Sayers had it going on. He was like the Michael Jordan or the Tiger Woods or the Muhammad Ali to my friends and me. He was the standard, and where I grew up, when I grew up, there weren't a whole lot of African Americans out there for me to look up to. I suppose if I'd had an interest in drama as a kid, I might have looked up to someone like Sidney Poitier, but athletics, that's what got me going. So as a kid, I looked to guys like Gale Sayers and Jim Brown. All my friends wanted to be Jim Brown, but I wanted to be Gale Sayers. He was my idol on the football field, which is why I was so pumped when Gale Sayers came to see me when I was doing Julius Caesar on Broadway. He came backstage after the show, and he gave me a couple of T-shirts, which he'd signed, and I was like a 9-year-old kid all over again. Not long after Gale Sayers' visit, I was contacted by a guy whose uncle used to run the Oakland Academy. He also came to see me in Julius Caesar, and somehow he'd come into the possession of some old 8mm footage of our championship game from my senior year in high school. Now, in the watery eye of memory, I'd replayed that game over and over, and in my watery eye of memory, I looked good. It had been 34 years since that game, and the way I remembered it, I'd scored every touchdown, shook every tackle, and made every cutback the way the coach drew it up in the locker room. We had gotten killed, but I'd scored every touchdown. That's how it registered. Nothing like Gale Sayers. I'd been telling my kids this story for years, and by the point I'd gotten old enough and forgetful enough, and probably full enough of myself that I could no longer tell which parts of the story I'd embellished and which parts were true. So I checked out this guy's footage, and it was a little grainy. It wasn't all jumpy and fast, the way old 8mm film can sometimes look. Whoever was holding the camera had a steady hand. I'd never seen myself play football on film, and I'd never been more anxious to see myself on film. It didn't matter how many movies I'd made. This was a bigger deal than any premiere. So I sat down with my oldest son, who's also a football player, and we watched it together. It turned out I was pretty good. It turned out I did score all of our touchdowns. It turned out I had some moves. I looked nothing like Gale Sayers, mind you, but I had some moves. I watched it that one time with my son, but he hung on to it, and he kept going back to it. And he tells me now that he has watched it over and over. He says, "Dad, your stance was just like mine." And I say, "No, your stance is just like mine. I mean, I was here first, right? It's my stance." But the great thing is, he watches the tape before he goes to his games. He says it's his inspiration. His mother and I have worked hard to lay a positive foundation for him and for all our children. And here we stumble across this 34-year-old footage of one of my high school football games, and that's what he grabs onto. I ended up staying close to home when it came time for college, because it's just what we could afford. I went to Fordham University in the Bronx, just down the road from Mount Vernon. I wanted to be a football player. Actually, I played football and basketball. I was a walk-on, and at that time, Fordham had a really strong basketball team. The football team hadn't been much of a powerhouse for some time, but the basketball team was another story. A couple years before I got there, they were the number 3 team in the country. Digger Phelps was coach before he went on to Notre Dame, But there I was, thinking I could play at this big-time level. I hadn't been recruited. I didn't have a scholarship, but I went out for the team, and I made it. I didn't play much, but I made it. The football team, too. That was my boys' club swagger, I guess. That was Billy Thomas telling me that I could do anything. I thought I was unbeatable, you know? And when you're young enough and cocky enough, you can pull off almost anything, especially if you've got a little bit of ability to back it up. That was me. I had just enough ability to back it up, and just enough ego to make up for the fact that I'd never started a single game as a basketball player or a football player. I hardly even got into a game, and there's just enough of that ego left over for me to claim that P.J. Carlesimo, my freshman basketball coach, couldn't see my talent, and that's why he sat me on the bench the entire season. We joke about it now, whenever we run into each other, but I still wish he had played me a little bit more. Even so, I took in great many lessons from him about hard work, about drive, about perseverance. That was PJ's big thing, that perseverance is your best talent. I wasn't a great basketball player, but I worked hard. My idea was to try everything the school had to offer, from the locker room to the classroom. I studied everything. At first I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I took classes in chemistry, biology, all the basic sciences. Then I thought I'd rather be a lawyer. After that, a journalist. At some point I realized that I was working my way toward the arts. I can't say for sure how that happened or when, but it happened. There were some stops and starts in there too, because I left Fordham for a while midway through my junior year so that I could take some time to figure out what it was I really wanted to do, which is really just a euphemism for saying I was on academic probation. Before I was asked to leave, though, someone tipped me to this public speaking class, and I signed up. And looking back, I might have signed up because there was a pretty girl in the class, or because I'd heard that it would be an easy B. That was the way I made my decisions in those days. I didn't plan out my life, I just lived it. When you're 20 years old, I guess that means you bounce from one path to the next until you hit on the one you're meant to travel. I wish I could remember the name of the old guy who taught that class. He used to have these elastic bandages hanging from out of his pant leg. It was the strangest thing. He'd wrapped his legs, both legs I think, and he couldn't do a very good job of it to keep the bandages from unraveling at the end of the day. It's strange the things that you remember, but a lot of what he taught us has stayed with me well. He had us read Shakespeare, and his passion for theater became a part of me. Not right away, but he sowed the seeds. This particular professor was involved with a theater club on the Bronx campus, and one day it fell to me to do a scene from Hamlet. I wasn't happy about it. In fact, I was completely terrified, and if I could have just raced from the classroom when I was through, I would have done just that, because I thought I was terrible. It was painful. I wanted nothing to do with the theater or school after that, and my grades really started to fall. I had to leave Fordham the following semester because I just wasn't cutting it. The call to the stage. That summer following my aborted junior year, I went to work at Camp Sloan, a YMCA camp in Lakeville, Connecticut. The counselors there put on a talent show for the kids. I put together these little poems and rhymes and skits for the kids in my cabin, and we stood up on stage and we did our bit. After the show, this guy named Miles Joyce came up to me and he said, "Man, have you ever thought about being an actor?" I thought back to that public speaking class and me reading Hamlet, and I shrugged off the compliment like I'd had it coming. I'd also directed plays when I was a younger counselor at Camp Rainbow in Fishkill, New York. I was 13 years old and I directed a takeoff on Batman and Robin that we called Flatman and Ribbon. Another fine contribution to the theater. Well, I took a class, I said to Miles Joyce, playing it casual. I did do a little Hamlet. That September 1975, I re-upped at Fordham for my second go-around as a junior. I was a junior and a half on the 5-year program, and at the last minute, I switched to the school's Midtown campus in Lincoln Center, which had a real drama program. I'm still not sure what I was thinking, but I guess there was something about it that was attracting me. I had to give up football and basketball, but I didn't mind because soon enough I had found something that I loved to take their place. I never would have thought it, but I became as passionate about drama and acting as I had ever been about football and basketball. And somewhere along the way, I had to give up my idea of being a journalist, although I'll let you in on a little secret. I still think of myself as an investigative reporter. That's what I do as an actor, the way I approach each new role. I learn everything I can about the character, the period, the setting, whatever's going on in the story so that I can put on what I know into the performance. If I do that part of my job well, the audience will never see it because it's part of the hidden work of an actor. So it all ties in. I was blessed at Fordham to cross paths with Robinson Stone, Bob to his friends and students. He was my English teacher, but he had acted for many years and he was involved in the theater program as well. He knew his stuff. He was in Stalag 17. He was in Othello on Broadway with Uta Hagen, Paul Robeson, and Jose Ferrer. He'd accomplished a lot, and he was eager to share what he knew. Very quickly, he became a real positive presence in my life when I was trying on this idea of becoming an actor. He was enormously helpful and encouraging. I wound up appearing in a student production of Othello, and after that, he ended up writing a recommendation for me when I was auditioning a couple of grad school programs in drama. Yale, SMU, a few others I no longer remember. I ended up going to the American Conservatory Theater, and Bob Stone wrote the director a letter that basically said, if you don't have the talent to nurture this young man, then don't accept him. He put it on them, which I thought was a really interesting way to go. It turned out to be an effective approach because I was accepted. I still have the letter. I keep it with me when I travel, along with a bunch of other personal stuff. The program for my father's funeral, things like that. Touchstones to keep me connected when I'm on the road or on location. Because I'm one of those guys who needs a little reminder now and then, a little push. I guess we all need those little prompts and props and visual aids telling us where we've come from in order to keep focused on where we're going. That letter of recommendation was a big deal, which is why I still carry it with me. I read it at the time and I wondered if Bob Stone was talking about someone else. I read it now and I try to find that young man he was going on and on about in the young man I actually was. He wrote, "Do take him if you want some genuine experiences of inspiration, and if you want the excitement of aggrandizing a talent which is finally going to be among the most exciting and most fulfilling of our time." I must have read that letter 100 times, and each time I think, wow. I remember what a charge it was to take in those kinds of positive statements about myself when I was only 22 years old. What a rush. To have someone believe in you that much is a tremendous boost. It left me thinking, well, something's going on here. I better pay attention to it and nurture it and see it through. Some people might hear those words and think them some kind of burden, but I took them as a blessing. That's another key. I knew I was blessed. And I know now, of course, that we're all blessed. But Bob Stone's words back then, they just kept me going. It's not like I walked around thinking, well, he thinks I'm so great, so it must be so. But he gave me something to live up to. He lit a fire in me. He might have been blowing smoke, gushing and saying all those nice things about me to help me get into the acting program. And when times got tough, when I wondered when I'd catch my first break, I kept telling myself, it'll all work out, reminding myself that something big was coming, a blessing. When I read those words, I felt no pressure at all, because I knew my talent was a blessing from God. These gifts, this talent, it wasn't me. Yes, destiny is what we make it, but we're helped along. Yes, I worked hard. Yes, I made some sacrifices until I made it. Yes, luck is where opportunity meets preparation. But first and foremost, it is a blessing from God, which is the foundation of everything. It's the extra push we need to take us where we're meant to go. It's not just because of what Bob Stone wrote and said. It's not just because it was my destiny. This man believed in me, and that was huge. He even had an agent friend of his come see me in Othello, so he did open doors for me. I might not have gone through all those doors, but he held them open for me. And because he believed in me, I believed in myself. There's a great saying, from those to whom much is given, much is expected. You hear that line a lot, but I always think, well, what's the definition of much? Is it monetary? Is it how many times you're on television? How many square feet you've built onto your house? How many deals have you closed or negotiations you've won? And how much is much? We've all been blessed in one way or another. We've all received our share of good fortune. So that's my definition of much. A single blessing is all the bounty in the world, and if you've been blessed, all you're meant to do is pass some of that on. You're meant to set a positive example. That's our responsibility. I was watching Crimson Tide not too long ago, and I remembered when the movie came out, I received a letter from a young black kid who said, I never thought I could be a captain of a nuclear sub. I never thought about it. I didn't think it was possible. But it is possible. Anything is possible. And that's what I wrote back to this kid. I wrote, you never know. I met another kid one day when I was in the store buying magazines. He came up to me all excited and he said, oh, Mr. Washington, man on fire, you helped me get sober. He started quoting all these lines and scenes from the movie, telling me that he'd been sober for 9 months. And I said to him, you never know who you touch. And he said, thank you, brother. God bless you, brother. So you never know who you touch. You never know how and when you'll have an impact or how important your example can be to someone else. Even when you're acting in a movie that's meant entirely to just entertain, you may strike a chord in someone and you may end up enlightening. My family members were pretty supportive when I told them I wanted to be an actor. They could see I was passionate about it. They could see that I had a talent for it. They could see it meant something. What they couldn't see was how I might make a living from it. But at that early stage, they didn't place too much emphasis on that. I mean, I was still in college. I was meant to explore all these new things, and if I could grab onto something and make it my own, If I could really own it, then I'd be in a better position to meet the next challenge or opportunity that came my way. As a parent, I try to take that same view with my children. It's not always easy, but I try. I'll give you an example. My son, John David, the football player, is a much better athlete than his old man ever was. He's paid a price for it, too. He's broken his clavicle. He's had knee surgery. He has bad ankles. His ribs are constantly banged up, but he loves it. And like I said, he's good at it. He played at high school, the all-star game with all these big-time players. Vince Young, who went on to play for Texas. Marcus Vick, who went on to play for Virginia Tech. Lorenzo Booker from Florida State. These were great, great players from all around the country, and down there on that same field was my son. The scouts were out naturally, and there were a bunch of schools interested in him. But what impressed me most about that whole recruiting process was an exchange that I'd had with an athletic director at Morehouse, who called me one day, and he told me he wanted to give John David a scholarship. I was thrilled at their interest, as I knew John David would be, but we didn't need the money. "Well, that's great," I said, "but why don't you just set aside that scholarship and give the money to someone who really needs it?" I didn't mean to sound full of myself or anything, but I'd had some success as an actor by then, and I'd put away a couple dollars, and I really thought the money should go to some kid whose parents couldn't afford to send him to college. I said, "Why don't you just accept him to your program and we'll pay our way?" The athletic director's answer really surprised me and sent a powerful message. He said, "We're not giving you a scholarship, Denzel. We're giving John David a scholarship." I said, "I'm listening." And underneath it, I thought, okay, I like the way this man thinks. He said he earned it. And he was dead on, because he recognized how important it was to own our own success, to grab onto them like they mean something, because they most certainly do. It wasn't about whether we could afford to send our son to Morehouse. It was about letting our son know that he earned his way in on the back of the game he loves. It was about validation. And it was about the kind of validation I could never give him as a father, because, hey, I'm his father. I'm supposed to pump him up with praise and love and support. It's in my job description. But this athletic director, he was coming at it from a different place, and that's what I liked about it. He wasn't doing me any favors. He was doing a solid for John David, because John David earned it. And do you know what? We've never really talked about it in just this way, but I'm guessing this scholarship offer represents for John David a lot of what I'd taken from the letter of recommendation I still carry with me. It's kind of like a giant pat on the back. And in his case, John David had to worry if Morehouse wanted him because of who his father was or because of who he was on the football field. And I'm proud to say his performance on the field during his 4 years at Morehouse erased any doubt in his mind that he got in on his own name. All of which takes me to the book you're now holding in your hands, which is also a kind of validation. Years ago, 1975 to be exact, I met a woman named Ruth Green at my mother's beauty shop. It was the spring of what should have been my junior year at Fordham, when I was a junior and a half, for those of you keeping score. I was sitting in my mother's shop deciding what I wanted to do with my life, and I could see this woman in the mirror sitting under the hairdryer. Every time I looked up, I caught her looking at me. She was looking at me, and I didn't know what was going on. Then all of a sudden she said, "Somebody get me a pen!" She had a prophecy. and she wanted to put it down on paper. She told me I would speak to millions of people. Okay, she got that right. She told me I would travel the world. Got that right too. She told me I would make a positive difference. I'm guessing the jury's still out on that one, but I'm hoping it comes back in my favor. At one time I wanted to be a preacher like my father, and I thought maybe this woman was picking up on that. But now that I look back on it, I'm guessing that she was talking about something else. And now that I've had some success as an actor and traveled the world and made a couple movies that have contributed, at least in small part, to the way we all look out on that world, I'm reminded of this woman's prophecy, and I take it very much to heart. I do. And I carry her words with me along with the program from my father's funeral and the letter of recommendation from Bob Stone and all those other touchstones of a lifetime, because taken together, they're what made me who I am. I think we all have a responsibility to give something back, to leave this world a better place for our having been here. For me, that means giving something back to the good people who help shape me and give my life purpose and direction. And that's the Boys and Girls Clubs of America at the national level and at my home club in Mount Vernon. So that's what I do. For the past several years, I've been a proud spokesperson for the organization. It's a role that I've taken on gladly because I can't think of a more noble or fulfilling mission than to guide our young children and lift them up and set them down on the right path. That's the mission of the clubs all across this great land, in our inner cities and our outlying communities, in rich neighborhoods and in poor, and every place in between. If you ask me, being successful means helping others. I look around at people who have accomplished all kinds of great and worthwhile things, and I think, okay, so what have you done with what you have? We all know about the awards you've won and the riches you've received, but at the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up and who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. It's like that saying, you never see a trailer behind a hearse. You know, you can't take it with you. The Egyptians tried that and it did not work. A push from someone else. And so I mean to shine a light on the Boys and Girls Club's mission by asking a wide assortment of successful people to share their memories about role models and mentors and positive influences in their lives, because these things are universal and these things matter. My hope is that in this chorus of voices, readers might find an empowering message and a stirring reminder that we all get where we're going with a push from someone else. Some of the folks you're about to hear from are all our household names, and some are known to just a few people outside their households. Many are alumni of the Boys and Girls Clubs in their own hometowns, and others have taken on a leadership role with clubs as adults. Others are friends and colleagues of mine who have shared their stories with me over the years and who have agreed to share them again here. Still, others are people I've reached out to because I've admired the way they live their lives, and I thought that they might have something to offer in this context. If there's a bottom line in this group, it's that all of them have achieved a significant level of success in their chosen field, and all of them have overcome a hardship or two. Julia Roberts, a friend and colleague, once said in a reference to her work that she was an ordinary person with an extraordinary job. Well, that's the kind that we've got here in this collection of good people, ordinary folks, from an ordinary beginning accomplishing extraordinary things. Whatever it is they set out to do, and however unlikely it might have seemed, they made it happen, with a little bit of help along the way, and with God's blessing. There's John Singleton, the acclaimed motion picture director who looked to his single-parent father as the inspiration not only for his breakthrough film Boys in the Hood, but also as a model for how to live his life with strength and compassion even on the hard streets of South Central Los Angeles. There's Chick Big Crow, executive director of the Boys and Girls Club in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, who draws courage and inspiration from the tragic death of her daughter, Sue Ann, a standout high school athlete who was killed in a car accident. Chick Big Crow now runs the first club on Indian land to honor Sue Ann's memory. There's John Antioso, CEO of Blockbuster Incorporated, who learned the basic principles of good business and personal service while riding his father's milk truck as a young boy and helping with deliveries. There's my good friend Daryl Chill Mitchell, an accomplished actor who was paralyzed in a motorcycle accident and who inevitably looked to the late Christopher Reeve to help him discover what it meant to roll through life in a wheelchair beneath the helpless gaze of friends and family. There's Toni Morrison, the Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist who found in a tossed-off comment from her father the template for a life well and meaningfully lived. There's former President Jimmy Carter, who took such a shine to a woman who worked as a caretaker on his family farm that he now singles her out as an abiding and formative influence. This woman could pick more cotton and shake more peanuts than any other person in Georgia, President Carter recalls, and she could catch more perch, but she also set such dignified example that she affected his thinking on racial equality. There's Bob Woodard, the noted investigative reporter who sought the guidance of his boss, Washington Post publisher Katharine Graham, while he was about to break the biggest news story of his generation, and who recalls her steadfast refusal to accept his initial contention that he and his partner, Carl Bernstein, would never get to the bottom of the Watergate story. There's Wesley Clark, the former NATO commander who sparked to the discipline of his childhood swim coach and credits his time in this young man's tutelage as his first test of character. There's Antoine Fisher, the Hollywood screenwriter whose self-titled script became my directorial debut, who managed to lift himself up from such hard-scrabble beginnings — his unwed mother was in prison when she gave birth to him — by convincing himself that the heralded accomplishments of people in his Cleveland community were his for the taking. There's Alex Rodriguez, the future Hall of Famer who went out to take grounders at the third base under the guidance of his boyhood baseball coach the night he learned he had been traded from the Texas Rangers to the New York Yankees and would have to master a new position, reminding us of the never-ending importance of hard work and dedication. There's the beautiful and beautifully talented Debbie Allen, another great friend, who was about to hang up her dance shoes and try on another career when she met Alvin Ailey and his groundbreaking dance troupe and came away with a new sense of self and who she was meant to be. Yes, destiny is what we make it after all. Same goes for legacy and opportunity and principle and all those good things. Humility, too. Every individual you're about to meet in these pages has remained humble, and that's been my mantra for as long as I can remember. Probably not when I was a kid, but in my young adult life, most definitely. And it's something I've tried to model for my children as well. Receive your gifts with open arms, but don't wear them on your sleeve. If there's one lesson to be learned from the voices you're about to hear, it is that it's not only on us, it's on the folks around us as well. And mostly, it's on our ability to keep open to their example. That's the underlying message in these pages, that you can draw a line from every great success back to some rock-solid foundation. A parent, a teacher, a coach, a role model. It all starts somewhere, and for me, that somewhere is with God. I'm not here to tell other folks what to believe, but I'll tell you what I believe, and this is what works for me. It's why I'm setting these thoughts to paper right now. It's why I'm here, by the grace of God. Ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things, perhaps, but I'll go one better and suggest that we're all extraordinary in our own way, and that it's what we do with our extraordinariness that sets us apart and makes all the difference. Read on and see if you don't agree. Denzel Washington. I don't know. It's just very moving to me. I hope it was moving to you. I have not read all of the short stories that are in here, just a few picked and chosen, but I definitely am going to continue all of them. And I'm really looking forward to reading the conclusion that Denzel writes that's in the back of the book. I don't know. It seems like this is a perfect time of the year, and being the last day of Black History Month, I thought it was kind of the right book. I hope you agree and that you pick it up yourself. You have a great week. Thanks for listening.